and welcome to this episode of the Survivor's Guide to Thriving podcast. I'm Amanda Sollman, and along with Mark Jewell, your host for this show and the creator of the Surviving to Thriving movement. Each week, we'll dive into the mindsets that keep us in survival mode and learn how to get on the path to a truly thriving life. If you're looking for a wake-up call and want some valuable tools to get there, you have come to the right place. After all, survival is dead. It's your time to thrive today. Now, let's head over to the show.
Perfect. All right. Hey, welcome everybody to another episode of the Survivor's Guide to Thriving podcast. This is your host and founder of the Surviving to Thriving movement, Mark Jewell, along with my badass friend Amanda Sollman over there in Michigan. And today we're doing this live on Facebook. And so if you're listening on the podcast and you saw it there, then you get to hear it twice, and it's going to be even better the second time around. But if you're live with us on Facebook here today, welcome to really, I think we've tried to do this live on Facebook in the past with massive failures, I think, due to the internet and things like that. And so we've got some new office space. Those of you that are watching this on Facebook can see behind me, it looks like I'm in a warehouse. I believe that this used to be a warehouse, part of Union Pacific Railroad. So anyway, we're into it today. So Amanda, you're the host today. You are in charge of this thing.
I'm in charge.
That's right. So what are we doing? What are we talking about?
All right. So when we do our live trainings, most people know that we do a lot of workshops, a lot of facilitation, and it really never fails that we get at least one person in the room, and you know it, I know it, chances are it's way more than one person in the room who does not want to be there, right? So probably their boss signed them up and they were just told to show up somewhere. And they know how professional development goes. They know how much these things suck. They don't want to sit in a room. They don't want to be talked to forever. But what's really kind of cool in our programs is that usually by the end of 2 days, they're singing a different tune, right? They're not complaining near as much. And so what we thought we would do for this week's podcast and this live recording that we decided to end up doing is let's talk about tips and tricks for how you can make your presentations more engaging, how you can get your audience more involved, that sort of thing. Because the reality is most of us will have to give a presentation at some point in time in our career. So let's not make it suck. Let's make it be more fun. So I figured to kick us off, I'd ask you, Mark, what do you think it is about trainings, about workshops, about professional development that just makes people absolutely dread it?
That's a very, very good question. So here's the thing. You're spot on. I mean, a lot of people that get sent to our programs because we're in the corporate space didn't always, find us on Facebook or find us online and say, oh, I want in on that. More often than not, they're sort of instructed, told, commanded, demanded, whatever, that they get to come and hang out, and go to sales training for a couple of days, or they go to, leadership training or whatever. And so the common belief, I guess maybe one of the common questions that people ask is like, oh my God, not another training, right? Not one more of these damn things, like more death by PowerPoint, more, time in the classroom, more time away from my job, more time away from my family, right? It automatically tends to trend negative. And so that is the reality. So the question is why? Like, why does that come up for a lot of people? And frankly, I mean, my opinion is, training across the vast spectrum of it, especially in the corporate space, often is poorly done. It's not enjoyable. And I'm just going to put that right out there. I mean, so much of it is, and we have had so many hundreds of conversations literally with our clients who say, that, they're expecting to walk in and see a guy in a suit with a PowerPoint with, all the things, and like another workbook with a 3-ring binder. And you know what, let's be honest, there's a time and a place for training that has a serious context, right? If we're doing, say, safety training, I mean, this is, we need to, it may not be the most fun thing to sit and listen to, but that stuff saves your life. It saves the lives of others. It gets people home with their hands and their feet and their, their fingers and all that stuff to their families. Like that stuff, yes. Okay. Obviously we need to dive in, but what about like sales training? What about, leadership development, customer service training, like all the different areas? I mean, one of the reasons that we people don't look forward to being able to go to that is simply because the expectation is that it's going to be a snooze fest, right? It's not going to be engaging. It's not going to be fun. It's not going to be, it's not going to engage me. And the number one thing that I'm looking forward to is the free beer at 5:00. Yeah. I've literally had, friends, people that have gone through our programs. We don't offer beer at our programs. I mean, unless they want to have one at dinner on our evening of our 2-day events. But I've literally had people Snapchat me a picture of a Miller Lite from 4:00 in the afternoon at their sales training and say, "Hey, how come I didn't get this at Mark Jewell's training?" I'm like, because you didn't freaking need it. So I'm getting a little bit off topic, but the reality is, a lot of training is just, it's poorly done. And sometimes, not to knock internal training, because I know it's all intended with the best, always. And sometimes it's just, people don't take as much pride in it, or facilitators haven't been through really good facilitator training, like you and I have. And so it sort of creates that experience where I'm basically going off of what I know and what as a facilitator, as a trainer, and then what I know is just simply a repeat of what I've seen in the past. And so people don't innovate. And, that's obviously where we differentiate. Like, we take a lot of pride. Like, my number one thing, anytime we run an event, I don't care if the thing's a flop, if we end up missing half a day due to a snowstorm or whatever, when they're in the classroom with us, that time is the best time that they could possibly have invested. Like, that's our standard. Like, they walk out of there 8 hours later, 16 hours later, 2 hours later, whatever, glad that they invested the time. Like, that's our standard. Right, at MJST, is like, we create that experience for them. So experience is important. And I think a lot of facilitation does not look into what is the experience going to be like for the learner. And then, basically it becomes about the facilitator thinking about the most effective way for them as the facilitator to spew the content and put that out in front of them. And then you leave it for your learners to pick up. And we sort of take the opposite track. We think about how do people learn best, create the environment for that. And then it's not so much about, how I teach or how you teach, or obviously we all have our own little nuances and things that we do well. I use a lot of stories. Some people use, I'm not opposed to slides if you do them well. Those are we all have different ways of doing things and doing them well. So maybe a little bit long answer for what you're asking there, Amanda, but that's really, this is what I see. I see a low standard of expectation for what training should be like. And then, so what do we get in return? A low quality delivery that then does not excite people. It doesn't get them jacked about going to the next customer service training to learn how to answer those phone calls, or the next sales training. Like, we literally had this one last story. I was getting ready to do a sales training, and I literally hear a guy from back in the room behind me while I'm getting ready to, like, welcoming everybody into the room, and he's like, "Our division must have sure fucked up this year because now we got to go to sales training." Right? So it's literally like training is viewed as a punishment.
Yeah. Right.
It's something you have to go do. And I guess, Amanda, to toss it back to you, because you're kind of our in-house strengths guru. Often, we talk a little bit about this at our live events when we do strengths work, but what about sending people to training to capitalize on what is good as opposed to what they think is wrong? Can you just dig into that a little bit for
I think that's a really good point, is because similar to how we often view professional development in general, right? We always think, oh, we've just got to fix what we're really bad at. But the reality is, and study after study after study has shown it, that we get way more return on our investment when we build on our strengths. And so I think that's, our approach to professional development is, if you're getting sent to one of our programs, it's because you're already really good at some stuff. So let's make you even better, or let's figure out the parts that you're really good at and capitalize on those. And I think that change in mindset in and of itself makes it more fun, because now, again, like you said, I'm not thinking about it as punishment. I'm thinking about it as, how do I grow? How do I get better? And that's a 180 from what we're normally used to. I want to pick up on something you said as well. Prior to this role, I worked more on the corporate space, or on the corporate side of things. And I think you are so right that, when we're putting together presentations, the bulk of our preparation is spent on content. What am I going tell this group of people in front of me, right? And like rarely, unless we're trying to teach them how to do something, right? Because sometimes I've seen, workshops where we're trying to teach them how to do something tactical usually. Unless that is part of it, most of the time we're just like, okay, what do I have to teach them and how do I get that content in a set of PowerPoint slides? Like the amount of time spent on developing PowerPoint slides is amazing, to each their own. And, like you said, place and time for it. But we're so right. So much of that preparation is on the content and not on the experience. And I think changing that mindset, if you are the presenter, can take you really far, because all of a sudden now my brain's in the perspective of the person in the chair, not me at the front of the room. And that's kind of a funky perspective shift.
Yeah. Yeah.
Then the other thing that you said, which you just was a little nugget, and I think it's a good segue into something that I've thought a lot about as we've done a lot of these trainings. So you and I come out of a world of youth training and facilitation, right? So we both came up through the National FFA organization, which for those of you who don't know what that is, it's a leadership organization for, junior high and high school students who are in agriculture and big emphasis on leadership. And so we came up, how do you train? How do you do workshops with, 14, 15, 16, 17-year-olds, not, people in their 20s, 30s, 40s. And so...
And here's what's important about that is like, if you don't do that well with a 14-year-old or a group of ninth graders, like they will run you over.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely. So I think that's the question is like, what have you learned? Because you worked for National FA for a while, so trained a lot of people in that age group. Like, what have you learned from youth training that you think could be applied more in professional style training? Because so often I think we just believe, adults they should just sit and listen, right? You're adult, you're mature, you should just know how to sit and listen. But there's a lot of takeaways from the youth side of the world that we could use more in the adult side of the world to make our presentations more engaging.
Yeah. So there's this like underlying assumption that, if you were prepping for a kindergarten class, right, and you're going to teach, like Everett, right, my little guy, he's 2. Like if you're going to do preschool, kindergarten level stuff, right, like you got to literally be redirecting their attention every few minutes, right? I mean, because it's on to the next thing. Like that kid can't focus on anything. Right. I mean, it's cool for like 30 seconds and then on to the next. And so it starts there. And then as you get a little bit older, right, it moved to maybe 5 minutes. Right. And then like, even with high schoolers, like you, it's hard to keep their attention focused on any single topic or story for more than like 8 to 10 minutes. I know there's probably like a sociology breakdown on what the actual numbers are, but this is just kind of my rule of thumb. If there's, depending on the age group we can basically assume I can keep them for 10 minutes and then we got to be on to the next thing. And the assumption became that, well, because we're adults, because adults should know better, right, then they can listen for fucking hours on end, right? Like there's just like no limit to how long adults can, like 3 hours and then maybe a pee break, right? Like you're supposed to be able to. So again, back to the previous point, right? It becomes about how the facilitator or the teacher or the trainer wants to get the information out. What's the most efficient way to get the most information plugged out of this brain and into the other brains, right? When the reality is like, it's just nothing sticking. You're throwing crap on the wall and 3% of it sticks, right? And so and I guess, back to, kind of my rules of thumb, even with adult training, like I think one of the things that helps us is that I've taken a lot of what I learned in doing youth development and simply applied the same principles into the adult classroom. So we do different things, like we use discussion, we use story, we use journaling, we use games, right? We try to do all the different things to keep the attention moving from one thing to the next. I get a little long-winded sometimes because I'm really confident in my storytelling ability. But other than that, like I try to keep the discussion moving, like 3 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, right? We give them a certain amount of time when they know they're going to be doing something, whether it's conversing or talking to the person next to them or group discussion or doing a project as a team or whatever the case might be. So I think those are, we've basically made the assumption that adults learn differently than kids. And the reality is that that's a myth. That is absolutely a myth. No one person, and we can even say with adults, my max is 15 minutes, right? 15 minutes before you need to be switching the mode from one thing to the next. If they've been sitting in their chairs, listening, watching your PowerPoint, working through the workbook for 15 minutes, it's time to shift gears and do something different. So you literally have them sit and turn and move to, I know you want to talk about like activities later, so I don't want to spoil that, but do something different, right? Move around the room, journal, write something down. So just shifting what we call their state, right? So the state is like whatever state their body's in that's the state that they're in. So if they're sitting, they're in a state of relax. They're in a state of sedentary activity. Okay. And the human body will only tolerate that for so long before it wants to move and needs to do something different. Otherwise, it doesn't pay attention to the next thing. And so then we need to shift. And so maybe we shift through conversation, we get them doing a journal, we get them moving around the room, we get them standing and talking, right? There's all these different things we can do that we use to manipulate the state or the energy of the classroom.
Mm-hmm. One thing that just popped into my brain that some people might find useful, we don't use this probably near as much as we could, but one of the tips that I always thought was cool from when we were doing more youth style facilitation is it's really hard for people, and I don't care what age they are, to literally just sit still and do nothing but watch you. And listen, right? Like it's really hard to sit still. And so sometimes even putting things on the table that are not distracting but tactile, whether it's like Play-Doh or a little game or something, but to avoid the pen clicking, which lots of people do, myself included, to give people something tactile to just keep their hands busy, it actually can help people listen better by just not feeling like they can't do anything. So I always thought that was kind of an interesting tip too.
Yeah, and there's tons of little things that you can do in a classroom that really keep the brain busy or allow you to do different things. So, one of the things, I'm terrible at this, but I do try. It's as simple as hanging, we use a lot of flip charts. So if there are things around the room that you can organize or make look tidy, and Amanda, you know me, I'm not a tidy person. This is not Mark's strength. Yet in the classroom, when it comes to developing others, I like to go into that mode. I really make an effort to try and hang my flip charts straight on the wall, up and down. And then if in as much as possible, at the same height. And that's not, different classrooms are not always, don't make that possible, but we try to have
at least one person.
Yeah, exactly.
Cannot deal with the fact that the flip chart's crooked.
Yeah, exactly. Or if I do put something crooked, it's on purpose, right? I put this kind of diagonal on the wall because I want you to see it, and then that sticks out, but then I have to go honor that flip chart. I'm touching the wall, and I don't know if it podcast, but I'm literally go and make a point as to why this is, and then it's oh, that's why that one's different than the rest. So there's little things like that. I know I've learned just little things if you have extension cords for a LCD projector, making sure that those are either taped down or neatly tucked underneath of something. If you've got boxes, bags, all that stuff, you either put into a closet or underneath the tablecloth where people can't see it, because the brain will wander and actually start to wonder, I wonder what's in that box. Is that a swag bag or is that a swag box? I wonder if my t-shirt's in there for later. So little things all of a sudden I'm focused on that, right? And a guy like me with lots of squirrel moments throughout the day will literally be looking at that, and then I get while you are giving me the instructions for the next activity, and then I don't hear them, and I'm not going to ask you, because I'm not going to be the person who raises their hand and says, hey, what the hell are we supposed to be doing? And so I don't do that, and then I get into the activity and I'm lost, right? And so now I'm behind on where everybody else is at. So those are there's a lot of little things you can do that add up, even just whatever, fidget toys, right? Yeah. Fidget spinners, I don't care, little stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. Totally. So let's back up and let's kind of walk through the process a little bit. So if you get the word that you've got to deliver a presentation, maybe you give presentations all the time. Maybe your boss was like, hey, you're really good at this. How about you teach everybody else to do it? So it's
Right.
one-off for you. What steps would you recommend that a presenter go to, or what would you recommend that they take into account on the preparation side? We teased this a little earlier, right? Content
Mhm.
versus experience, but what are the things that you think about before you go into that presentation?
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to put it up, frame it up like this: MVP, I call it the minimally viable product. Okay. So if you're the expert at your workplace or in your specific area, and you've been asked by somebody else to talk or teach, why you're so good, or what you've used in order to be good. If in your prep, right, can you boil it down to like the minimal number of things, 3 things, if you will? Okay. Can you get down to 3 things that, or 5, whatever, for whatever reason they say you should use an odd number. I don't really know. There's some psychology there. 3 to 5. Okay. That you can literally teach easily, let's say you get 60 minutes to do it. Okay. So understand there are those, whatever, 3 things, and I'm going to spend 20 minutes roughly on each one. Or there's 5 things, and I'm going to spend 10 minutes on each one, 5 minutes to preview, 5 minutes to review at the end, something like that. So what I'd like, what I mean by MVP, what a minimally viable product is like, what's the least amount of stuff that I can talk about that gets them the maximum results for the time invested, right? If you've got more time available, you can do more things, you can go more in depth. But most of the time, let's be honest, you don't have more than an hour. Maybe you're not a professional trainer, you're not a professional speaker. This is, you don't get paid to do what I do every day. So what's the minimal amount of things? And this is not meant to be lazy or anything like that. It's meant to be what is best for your learner. Okay. So now let's say let's say you got 3 things, and one of them, let's say that you're a salesperson, you've gotten really good at setting appointments. Okay. So rather than go in and say, hey, this is how I do it, and I think you should do it my way, maybe you begin at first by asking them a question like, hey, what do you guys do? What are you doing right now in order to set appointments? We call this consultative coaching, in a way, just like kind of consultative selling. We call it the Socratic method. Okay, so Socrates basically believed that the answers were already in the minds of the learners. The facilitator, the speaker's job, is to just draw them out. Okay. And so we do a lot of this. Like, we try to understand, if I'm teaching sales process, if I'm teaching a leadership concept, if I'm teaching a mindset concept, what do you already know? Like, intuitively, what do you already know? What are you already doing? What this does is actually honors the stuff that they're already doing. And it might help them see, oh, I'm actually doing something kind of like that. All he did or all she did was tweak it a little bit. So now I don't feel like such an idiot when I'm looking at somebody else telling me how I should do it. Now it's like, oh, I'm like 1 degree off. All I can do is tweak that. Boom, I'm golden, right? So we start to, try to open it up by like, okay, what do you already know? Like, what are you already doing? How are you already doing this? Far be it from me to be the only expert in this company. And then we go in and then you say, hey, I do all these things too. Here's the one thing that I do different. And then if you're comfortable, now this is obviously playing to my strengths as I say this, if you only have a short amount of time, let's say 60 minutes or less, try to do what you can to teach through story. Okay, people are much more interested in stories than facts. Now, if you got a good statistic every once in a while, like, throw it in, like, build a case for why you're right. But let's just say, hey, what, 3 months ago I was struggling, couldn't get an appointment, couldn't get anything on the calendar, I was just really, really having a hard time, and then I made this one little tweak, and here it is. Okay, and that makes it so much more engaging and so much more interesting to other people. Now, one other thing that I want to hit on really quick is I use a process called scaffolding. I don't know. I stole it from somewhere. It's something I've learned over time. A lot of times people really struggle. I think like, I've got an hour. What am I going to talk about for an hour? Right? What am I going to say? Like, legitimately, guys, like, if it's an hour, like, maybe you have to actually talk for 20 minutes. You don't have to talk for an hour, right? So let's think about it this way. So the question becomes, how can I get other people to talk? So I already hit on one, like, ask them what they already know about the content. And then, so within that though, sometimes, like, let's be honest, we've all been there when we're in a group and we're going through training, or, somebody's talking, and then the facilitator asks, okay, who has a question, or what questions do you have, or something like that. And nobody raises their freaking hand. There's nothing more frustrating as a trainer, speaker, facilitator than being at the front of the room and you say, does anybody have any questions? And crickets, right? And it's, and then literally what it is now is it's a Mexican standoff where we're waiting to see who's going to talk first, like who's going to break the silence. So what I like to do is what I call scaffolding. And so instead of saying, hey, does anybody have any questions? Okay, you can automatically assume if you ask the question, does anybody have any questions? The answer is always going to be no. Okay, I mean, unless this is like,
question.
Yeah, exactly. Anytime you give them a yes, no question, they're more often than not, they're going to default to no, not because they don't have questions and not because you're boring or non-interesting. It's because nobody wants to be the one who stands out in the group as the person who didn't know a thing. Okay. So I want to scaffold this up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, hey, what I want you to do real quick is just talk to the person next to you. Have a little conversation with somebody next to you about, what do you know about setting appointments? Or, hey, what do you know about, like, when was a challenging time that you had in managing an employee? When did somebody, screw up and you lost your cool or something like that? Like, you get them talking for, say, 2 minutes, maybe 3-4 minutes, in a short presentation. We get them having a quick conversation, and then we bring it back and we say, okay, what did you hear? What did your neighbor talk about? What were you guys, what were you challenged by? And then all of a sudden they start to open up a little bit better, a little bit deeper. And so then I might even go, I'm going to go a little bit out of order. Often what I'll do is I'll have them jot things down in their notebook too, or on like a sticky note or a piece of paper or the back of their name tag or, name tents or whatever you're using in your classroom. So I might even have them just kind of write down, hey, what are 3 ideas? So after I've had this conversation, whatever they had, they talked to a couple people. And then now they're going to move out and say, okay, I want you guys to come up with like, what are the 3 most challenging things related to this topic for you? Right. And so now they put those 3 most challenging things, and then I might do a further discussion and put those 3 most challenging things on the flip chart. And then later on, I will actually show how the stuff I'm going to talk about matches up with each one of those 3 things, or all those things, answers those questions. So just to review scaffolding, right? So we start with something small, like just jot down some ideas in your notebook or have a quick conversation with somebody next to you. Then we could even take it out to open group discussion, or maybe even small group discussion to keep it even smaller and come up with the best ideas in the group. And then we bring it out to the full group. And what you're going to notice is as you scale this up, you've made them more comfortable because they've heard from the person next to them or the small group they were working with that other people have problems too, and that it's okay. So nobody wants to be the person who feels like an idiot because they have problems. We all do this. We all figure, like, we get stuck in this story in our minds, like we're screwing this up so badly. Like nobody could possibly have screwed this up as badly as me. And I guarantee you in every single job, somebody screwed it up way worse than you at some point. Okay. That's part of the process of growing. That company wouldn't even exist if somebody hadn't screwed some things up along the way. Okay. It's just part of the growth process. So be cool with that. Like just understand, hey, it's okay to have problems. But most people don't get that. They don't go around thinking about that stuff like I do all day. And so we need to tease it out of them just a little bit. So we start with something small, then we move to something medium, and then we move to something large group. And they're going to have a lot greater discussion. Plus, that whole process is way more meaningful because they contributed the information you didn't tell them. The easy thing to do would be to, actually the lazy thing to do would have been created you spent all the time thinking up and putting all those ideas into the slides. Here are all the problems that you probably have. Then you put that on a slide and tell them the problems they have, right? And they're listening like, screw you, man, like that, right? Like that's the response they're having, like, oh, or they relate to it, but then they don't engage or feel the content in their bodies, and then it's not as meaningful. So when you do it this way and scaffold their way up, help them scaffold up, then you actually create a meaningful learning experience that's different.
It's almost like crowdsourcing examples versus you feeling like you have to bring every example to the table. Like crowdsource it. You got a whole room full of smart people.
Yeah. Well, and so here's one of the number one compliments that we frequently get. And this is not just me. This is, when you do it, I know Wade just had the same experience with his presentation out in Western Nebraska. The common thought going in is like, oh, my people don't talk. This is not a talkative group, right? Like I don't, and then we get done and they're like, I can't believe how much you had everybody talk. I can't believe how engaged everybody was. Like, I can't believe, right? And then I'm like, Yeah, magic, and it's simply like simple little tactics. Think of it like a stair step, right? I want to stair step the engagement of the group from nothing up to where we end. And then, when you do this, you follow this kind of protocol, like you find, number one, your hour is going to go by fast. You're actually not going to have enough time to cover everything you wanted to cover. And that's okay. Because if you get to the end and they want more, you've done your job.
That's really good. That's really good. The other thing in there that I wanted to pull out, and you mentioned it briefly. So the scaffolding, I think that's awesome. The nice part about that too is like you can play to different personality types, because you will have people who are comfortable speaking in front of the whole group. You'll have people who would just much rather talk to a partner or a small group. And then you'll have people who are really self-reflective, but don't really want to be vocal in front of the group. So like each of those methods, I think is a really cool way to, again, kind of vary your delivery so that different personalities can still engage with the content. The other thing that you said though, and this is so small, but for me, it's one of my favorite things to use is like, it's really easy to default as a speaker to saying, do you have any questions? And you mentioned, do you have any questions? It's a yes, no answer. Most people will default to no, because they'll look around the room, and if no one else is raising their hand, they're like, well, if I've got questions, I must be the dumb one because no one else has questions. Like one of those tiny little changes in your words is, instead of saying, do you have any questions? Ask them, what questions do you have? And it creates this assumption that there are questions in the room. So it automatically makes it a little safer, I think, because instead of making it a yes, no, it's open-ended. Like you are expected to say something. And again, it's just a tiny little shift to the wording that I think brings people in easier.
Yeah, it's super easy to do. It doesn't take you any work or any prep, and it literally just changes the whole feel for it. So you hit that one right on top of the head. The other couple, like there's two other ones that I use a lot that I know I hear you do quite a bit when you facilitate. So the first question is 2 words. It's what else, right? So if we're facilitating out some ideas and you say, hey, whatever, who has a question on this? And then we get, some of those questions and we say, okay, what else? Or what other questions are there, right? So it's assumptive. And by the way, we teach this exact same process in our sales training, because we're assuming, like we're trying to lead that customer in conversation. And so facilitating a sale is no different than facilitating a classroom. In the classroom, I'm facilitating and selling ideas. At the farm gate or with a customer, I'm selling products or services, right? It's totally the same thing. It's just a different context. And so the other one I use is tell me more. So tell me more about that. Dig, or if it's a kinesthetic learner, which means like there's somebody obviously who likes to do, things, I'll say dig into that for me. And so we could probably go all day. There's actually there's a couple really good books that I've learned from. So the train the trainer coach that I learned most of this stuff from, like 15 years ago plus at this point, is a guy by the name of Mark Reardon. And Mark's out of California. I'm super pumped because we're going to have him come in and work with our team this fall and help us even grow far, better to become even better facilitators. But Mark wrote, he was a co-author on a book called Strategies for Great Teaching. Okay. With Seth Durner, who's also from an FFA world background and lives over in Lincoln, Nebraska. I'm starting to see this Nebraska connection to amazing facilitators. But Seth was and remains a personal hero of mine in that facilitation world. Runs a company called Vivaic, and that does custom training design and lots of other cool things. So they're a great group out of Lincoln. And so Seth and Mark wrote Strategies for Great Teaching is the name of the book. And there's just tons of like little tidbits, like little strategies that you can use. And I have a couple of copies of that floating around that I've referred to every once in a while when I'm looking to shift things up and change. So that's the easy one. Mark was also co-author on another book, which is really geared towards elementary teachers. That's literally how he got his start. But it's called Quantum Teaching. And it comes back to your point before, like, can't we just take these, cool things that we do to make learning fun for kids and apply them into the adult context? And the Yes. The answer is yes. The short answer is yes. Like, it's super simple. It's easy to do. You can easily adapt a lot of these, kid strategies, and just put them in the adult context. So quantum learning or quantum teaching, excuse me, and strategies for great teaching are two like really good books that kind of form the foundation for my facilitation and then how we do things at MJST.
Mhm. The other one that I'll throw out there, and I'll find a link somewhere on the internet to put in the show notes, that's a structure that you and I am sure both, I know I learned it, and probably actually I probably learned it from you, is what they call the magic formula to
Oh,
teaching.
yeah.
And it's just a
Yep.
way to structure your presentations and kind of have some clear outlines as to how to follow. So I'll plug that in to the show notes. But that's another way, if you're kind of like me, where you're sort of like an efficiency systems type person, having
Mm-hmm.
some types of structure to lay your presentation onto can sometimes be helpful.
Yep, absolutely. Do you remember when I have the magic formula song when I taught you guys that
Uh,
like 9 years ago?
Probably.
The magic
Probably.
formula. Da, 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 da.
Yes, you did. Now that you sing it, I now clearly remember the Addams Family layered into the magic formula.
See,
That's
okay,
awesome.
so there's another strategy you can teach with song, everybody, and like use some of those lyrics, those song, like the tune that everybody knows, like everybody pretty much has heard the Addams Family tune. Although, let's be honest, like we're getting into some generational stuff now. Like,
May not.
yeah, I take that for granted. What was it, Free Willy, that nobody had seen at the,
Oh, nobody. Not
of
even me.
course, So you haven't seen oh my god, okay, it's on Prime, Amazon Prime for free right now. It's the
That's
new
what I heard.
so check that off your bucket list to go watch Free Willy. But yeah, so that they're like little tunes. If you're a lot of our audience obviously is rural or comes from rural America, so you can take some of those country songs, take an old Garth Brooks song, and you can just switch around a piece of it to get them ingrained with a content. Maybe it's an acronym you want them to learn or a concept. I'm sitting here thinking like maybe I need to review some of our content and see if I can put it in with like get a little guitar picking going on.
Yeah.
I don't know how to play guitar, but I'll learn
Me.
if that's what it takes to get the best classroom available. Awesome. All right, what's up
Awesome.
next?
Cool. So we've talked about a lot of different activities. So I guess break it down for me in two pieces. So one, how do you choose which activities you're going to use? And that might be different for other people too. But so how do you pick from all of the different activities that you have available to you?
Okay.
And then the second part is a question is like, which are your favorites and why?
Mm-hmm. Cool. All right. So I will choose my activities kind of based on two different things. The two buckets would be number one, is this just like kind of what I call like a normal part of the day? Just like, we're working through content. I don't have time to move them around the room a lot. I don't have time to take lots of breaks and like try to get them back into the classroom. As far as like, sending them out to go work on a group activity or something like that, we kind of, we have content to get through. So I basically, in those scenarios, I'm going to default to talk to your partner, right? So partner up, have a discussion with somebody close by, or get together with somebody you haven't worked with, but still working in pairs, right? So working in pairs. And then I will default to their journals. And so we always give them something to write in our classrooms. And so it's just like journaling, like jotting down, okay, what are the 5 things that you already know about the topic of going from surviving to thriving, right? Okay, jot it down, just see what you already know. So they write, for 60 seconds, and then we debrief that as a group. Those are kind of the, 2 of the go-tos. And then there's group discussion. Where they'll do something that way. And those are kind of the 3 like go-to things that make a classroom feel really involved. I don't have a lot of time to be doing other things. I don't have time for a 20-minute project with a group or something like that, which we almost never do. So we're going to kind of default to those things. Okay. So the first bucket is like, hey, we've got content, we got to move through it. We need to get this concept out in front of them so they understand it. And that's kind of what I do. And the other thing in that scenario is I might just stop. Say I'm 12 minutes into it, right? 3 minutes before my 15-minute mark or something like that. I just sort of, and I'm not watching a clock, by the way. Like at this point, thousands of hours of doing this, like I will just kind of have a feel. You can actually energetically feel like, how's your classroom doing? Do they look bored? Like, look at their faces. If their cheeks are flushed, they're freaking tired. Okay, give them a break. Like, stop like crushing through content for the sake of crushing through content. That's not going to get you any result. So, you look at their faces, you look at their feet. Are their feet, fidgeting a lot, especially like your ADD guys in the room? Are they getting fidgety? Are they whatever? You need, at that point, you need to do something different. If not, if they're engaged, like, you can just kind of keep doing these little things, and then talking through your thing. And so I get to that 12-minute mark, and I might just say, okay, hey, just kind of curious, what is landing with you? Like, what's coming through for you? What are you learning? What insights are you gleaning from this? Amanda, go. Right. And I don't say who's got a question. I mean, like, literally I will pick somebody. And then as soon as you pick somebody, by the way, like, our lizard brain, our primitive brain goes on high alert, because next, like, you're thinking, oh shit, he might call on me next. So I start thinking about stuff. So it automatically re-engages the brain back into the environment. So that's a cool one. Those are the two buckets, right? Or that's the first bucket. The next bucket is like, hey, I want to make this really special. Like, I want to do something now that is going to help them remember things a little bit differently. So that's when, way back like 10 years ago, I came up with the Magic Formula song, because at FFA we taught a curriculum writing strategy called the Magic Formula, and I wrote a song called the Magic Formula, and that helped everybody learn all the steps of the Magic Formula. I bet if you gave me 5 minutes, I could probably like come back with all the steps, because it's that deeply ingrained. I remember exactly where I was when I wrote that, by the way. I was in Macedonia. I was in Macedonia teaching kids. So anyway, there's something like that. In the Strategies for a Great Teaching book, they use what's called a gallery moment. And I use this commonly to either review the end of the day or open up the beginning of the day. And so this is a review activity where I will literally have them kind of pretend like they're going on a date with somebody in the room, or they're just getting together with a partner, pretending that they're at a gallery. And we use a lot of flip charts. And so the flip charts will be on the wall, and we'll have them go around and look at each flip chart as if it were a piece of art in an art gallery. And they are then like engaged with that piece, and they can talk about what was relevant, what came through for them, what was the insight that concept or that conversation gave them. So that's one that I use quite a bit. I would say that's definitely a go-to favorite of mine, because it's kind of fun. It shifts the energy, it gets them going. I have, so this is actually a full workshop activity, but to this day, it's probably one of my most favorite original pieces that I've created in our world, and it's called the 10X Challenge. Mm-hmm. And so I wrote that several years ago, and quite literally it failed the first like 5 times that I tried to do it, at least as far as what I was expecting it would turn out to be. But the 10X Challenge basically works like this. I have them working in teams of whatever, 3, 4, 5, 6 people. They get, each group gets $20. And they have the next 90 minutes or 60 minutes or however much time I have on the agenda left to take that $20 and turn it into 200. So there's the 10X challenge. And this is great for like team building. It's great for all kinds of stuff. I mean, you can use it with sales teams. You can use it with executive teams. I believe we're going to get a chance to maybe do this with like a foundation board in August. So I'm hoping that will happen anyway. And so what happens is, the money that gets, like, this is literally real money. This isn't fake money. They're not allowed to use their own money. So they have to come up with this. And in some cases, like when we're really organized and we're not doing this on the fly, we actually will create like a PayPal link where they can do that, but you don't have to have all that set up. You literally just give them a $20 bill each group, and it's their job to turn that 20 into 200. The team with the most at the end is the winner. And so what we find is after about 20 minutes of them being completely dumbfounded and having no idea what they're going to do, the ideas start rolling. They start to get gutsy, and everybody wants to win because it's competitive. We've literally raised in 90 minutes as much as $10,000 with a group of like 40 people. So it's a very powerful activity. And all of a sudden they start to realize like what I can do in a small amount of time when I'm engaged, when I'm working with my team, when I'm, when I'm risking, when I'm taking, doing things I wouldn't normally do, I'm capable of much more than I ever thought was possible. So that's probably like my most favorite, impactful, because the money always goes to something good. I mean, we've raised money for food shelves. We've bought FFA jackets. I think we literally bought like 150 FFA jackets for Minnesota FFA kids a couple years ago. I mean, there's just so many cool things that we can do that are positive and impactful. So just, to kind of sum that up, my two buckets are like, what are just my basic run of the mill, low time investment things that I can do, right? So that's talk to your neighbor, work in pairs, work in groups, journal, write down some ideas, write your ideas down on sticky notes, and then I literally have them just come stick those on a flip chart. And then we discuss as we go. And then there's the other things like the gallery moment, the 10X challenge. I might have them do other things. I will literally take we always have them list out what do they want to get out of the training. And then on day 2, we'll have them for the review. We'll actually have them go around the room and write down on flip charts which of the concepts are helping them get what they wanted out of the training. And so they do that, and they actually have to get up, use markers, go right on flip charts out around the room. We use a lot of flip chart paper. If you don't have a lot of flip chart paper, you don't have to do that. You can literally use 8.5 by 11 sheets, like just get a ream of paper and have them use, pens or markers and just put them on the wall so that they're getting up and moving away from the table. For those of you that are new to facilitation, never done this before, or, just wanting to improve, there is nothing magic about them having to sit on their ass all day long, just because that makes you feel like you're in control. A lot of times people don't, you get uncomfortable giving them the freedom and flexibility to move around the room and do something other than listen to you. That makes you feel like you're not in control of the room. And that could not be further from the truth. Just because you're in control of the room and they look like they're sitting there and behaving does not mean in their mind that they are fully engaged with you. If they sit there quietly all day long, I guarantee you're screwing something up. You've lost them. Okay, they'll be polite, and then by the way, they're never going to tell you what they fully thought. Nobody will ever tell you the full truth about, hey, I thought that was amazing, or hey, I thought that was a complete waste of my time. Rarely. I mean, on occasion, I'll get like a really blunt, piece if we miss the mark. But by and large, be like, oh yeah, great, thanks, and that's it, because they're just grateful it wasn't them doing the presentation.
So one thing, and this comes up a lot for us. So it never fails that we get a piece of feedback that's like, one of my favorite parts is that you didn't use PowerPoint, right? And we're not here to be like down with PowerPoint, anti whatever, like not the reason. But it is something that is used so consistently. People have basically learned how to become numb to the PowerPoint slides. And the other side of it is that, many presenters will just read their slides. And what that means from an audience standpoint is, why am I even here? You could have just emailed me those slides. I didn't have to take 2 hours out of my day. Why am I here if you're just going to read, right? And so, people will refer to this as the death by PowerPoint. So if you're listening on the podcast, if you're watching on the video, Mark, you have mentioned flip charts a lot. Most people know we're talking about those big, sticky note, post-it back, white charts or yellow charts or whatever. Talk to me a little bit about why you like that format versus, using more minimal PowerPoint slides or just talking or something like that.
So, for me personally, it gives me a lot more flexibility in the moment to shift and change. I mean, if I'm being honest, like that's where it started. I don't do well with a rigid agenda where we have to hit this point and then this point and then this point and then that point and then review. Like that's not, like I know we're going to get that done eventually. I personally enjoy the flexibility. That was just, and that's a me thing. Like if you like flexibility, then that's, an easy way to go. If you're somebody who likes to be more prepared, right, you can achieve the same thing. I do my flip charts on the fly most of the time. However, when I was doing facilitation for other companies, for FFA, for things like that, I would actually get to the conference site ahead of time and look through my curriculum and actually create them in advance. Right. So I wasn't I wasn't as confident at that point in the content. Right. So now we're teaching MJST content. I mean, for the most part, I've written most of it, with the exception of like strength scope and some of the other stuff that we do. Or I literally, I don't know how many times I've taught each module. Like I know it's over 100 and it could be several hundred. I have no idea, no concept of how many times we've done it. So it's super internal and I can manipulate that on the fly. If it's content that I'm new with, I've never taught it before, it's not a bad idea to just create that ahead of time. You can do the same with like a minimalist PowerPoint. Just don't cram a shitload of words into your PowerPoint. Like nobody wants to see that. It's much more powerful if you just put a picture that represents what you're talking about with one word or 3 words or a phrase or a quote, right? That represents. So now it becomes about that's a visual that supports you. And then you're engaged with them and having the discussion and talking about what this is for.
Yep. One thing I just want to highlight. So I'm also a big fan of, if you're going to use PowerPoint, pictures, single words, quotes, things that aren't really, really super text heavy. And I will say though, and this is probably where people freak out, that means that as a presenter, you have to be better prepared. Because a lot of the times the reason we put lots and lots of content on the slide is if I forget something, I've got my crutch, right? So whether you decide to go flip charts, whether you decide to go minimalist PowerPoint slides, it will be more effective for your learner because it's more engaging. But it also means that you have to know your shit. Because if
exactly.
you don't, you will fall on your face. So it's a double-edged sword there.
Yeah. And so here's the thing that you can do. I mean, if you're somebody who really likes to share, like to go back to Strengths Finder, not Strength Scope, but if you've got input on your Strengths Finder, that means like you're the one who's always sharing, like you just read this article and I want to share that with you. And you're the one who's you'd like to give them as much content as possible because that's important to you. If that's an important thing for you, awesome, good for you. You can actually like create the PowerPoint and then put that down in the notes section or in the whatever they call it. I don't recreate PowerPoints anymore. So like the little thing below the slide when you're building it, right? Like that's a great place to put in all the other information, and then you print that out, bring it with, okay, so that you literally have the PowerPoint that you can follow with the notes section printed, on the side of it. You can do that. Just give it to them at the end. Otherwise, they're going to spend the whole time reading like the book that you wrote. That's cool. That gives you the ability to still share that. Now that's the take home. That's not the presentation. And, that becomes a good resource that they can have if you like to provide that level of resource. I prefer to just, have them write down what was relevant to them, and then they can come back and review their own notes later. So that's another great way to do it. So, there's really no right or wrong way, right? We're just talking about different ways to make things more engaging, more powerful, less, deadly when it comes to classroom environment, and as far as like, boring people to death.
Yep. Absolutely.
Yep. Right,
so I know we're closing down here in an hour, and I want to make sure that we touch on a couple more things that are related, obviously, but have a little slightly different tone. So I want to take this from 2 angles. So the first angle is, what kind of buy-in do you need to get from managers if you're in-house, or clients if you're an outside contractor that somebody is bringing in, around your curriculum and what activities you're going to use? Like how much do you have to get the sign-off before you do different things?
Got it. So from an outsider, like if you're the outside facilitator and this is not an internal thing, I know I'm a little bit of a cowboy when it comes to this. And in fact, I just don't give a shit what the manager thinks a lot of times. Like I know at the end, like they're going to get something out of this, and I don't do anything in my classroom that's not, that's unsafe or anything like that. I know that it's going to have meaning and that it's going to be memorable. And then people are going to speak about it with pride that they went through it, or with a tone that says, hey, like this was awesome. So that being said, you got to consider so one of the things that we obviously do is we incorporate kickboxing into our flagship programs, the Thriving Leader, our Relationship Mastery Experience, our Millennial Mastermind. So we do workouts, right? So, we've got to understand, like, does somebody have, did somebody just have a knee replaced or something like that, right? I got to understand, I got to watch for that. That's one of the reasons that I'm not a certified personal trainer. That's one of the reasons why we use Mick Doyle's gym when we do it here in Omaha, because he's certified. They sign a waiver when they go in, and so at least he's free and clear. When we just did a live event in St. Louis. Christina on our team is a certified personal trainer. So we have somebody who can watch, and we had some people in that room who were struggling, right? I mean, they were on the struggle bus as far as their physical fitness. She adapted the activity for those person, right? If you were not experienced in that, you might not catch it. So there's those things, you need to consider, are you teaching, content in one place and then going and teaching their competitor next door the same thing? Like that can start to, we're sort of watching geographical boundaries between certain clients at this point, because the ag industry is so small, it's really hard. So, one company, if we were working with competitors, one company would might get Mark as a coach, and somebody else might get Todd or Wade, right? So you're not going to have the same coach coaching the same salespeople. So at least you have some separation. Intellectual property doesn't become an issue at that point. I guess those are the big things that I would watch. Anything physical, anything that, is competitive from a, what that company does standpoint. Those are things that we need to watch out for. But from just like general activities in the classroom, and the only thing that I really, really care about is, what does that manager, buyer, whoever is doing it, like what makes this a worthwhile investment of their money? And that the number one answer that I get for that is I want them to have a good experience. That's usually the answer. I want them to have a good experience. So then it's on you to make sure that it's a good experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would just add to that, good experience. There are some people who ask for a little more, and I would say like in those cases, we focus on like, what is the outcome that you want? Like, what do you want them to learn? And so that way we're focused on outcomes, not necessarily tactics, which is something we're trying to teach our clients in general is, tactics will vary. Outcomes are the important thing.
Yeah.
And that gives us more flexibility too, because one of the biggest challenges you see normally in training and facilitation is that we assume that everyone learns the same way and that everybody is at the same starting point. And if we are only focused on tactics, like what's the, agenda item you're going to hit before lunch? What's the agenda item you're going to hit after lunch, right? If we're only focused on that, we're missing the boat for people who either may not be at the same starting point or may learn differently and may need, more or less time spent in other places. So I think that's the other preparation we'll do with some of our clients is like, here's where we'll get on the back end. How we get there is going to vary based on what we learn. I mean, because for pretty much most of the people, we don't know them till we step in the room with them that day, right? We're not in-house, so they're not our coworkers. So until we know what we have, we don't know what we've got to work with. And it's really hard if we try to be too prescriptive before then, I think.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you got to leave some flexibility, some room for flexibility. You know what you're going to cover, how we get there. Like just, you don't have to have an attachment to what it needs to look like or what it's supposed to look like whatever, generally speaking, you're going to have a start time. Excuse me. You're going to have a start time, and then you're going to have lunch is going to be at noon, right? You want to make sure that your food is coming, and then, you've got the rest of the day and you're going to be done by 4 or 5 or whatever. That's really, those are the basics. And then what we do in between is really try to have a good, strong opening and then a good, strong closing. And then it gives you some flexibility, to play with what's in the middle.
And that's literally, if you're coming to one of our events, it is literally what your agenda says is that we will start at this time. Lunch will be somewhere in the middle. We'll be done by this time.
And by the way, like one of the reasons that I, so sometimes when we get hired to go out and do things, like they want to know, like, okay, what are we doing and when? Right? I remember early on when I was doing stuff, they would want to know, okay, what time do you want to take breaks? What time do you want to have this? What time do you want to have that? And I'm like, okay, we're going to start at 8, lunch is at noon, we're done at 4. That's all you're getting from me, because what happens, so if you have that in an agenda, right? So this is a very baby boomer thing. We like to make agendas, and I get that. And I see value in agendas. But when you put in okay, we're going to do this, and then we're going to take a break at 9:15. Well, that's cool. What if the discussion is hot? Like, what if it's, your classroom's rocking, all of a sudden it's 9:15. That's good for the people that are really into it. But then there's 15 people over in the corner, like looking at their watch, right? Or checking their phones for time. And so that's why I say, don't do an agenda. Like, you just do what's natural. And then like, watch your audience. You can tell if they're getting tired. If they're getting tired, stop. Like, take a break. There's nothing that says you have to cover all the 3 hours of content in one 3-hour stretch. Go for an hour, take a 5-10 minute break, bring it back in, go for another hour. Like, there's just, break it up. There's too many people are overdoing that because they just feel like they don't have enough time, or, they're not comfortable taking breaks because what if they might never come back or something like that. So there you go.
That's good. That's good. So let's take the flip side of it. So we talked about kind of getting buy-in from managers, clients, more higher ups. How do you deal with attendees or, people sitting in your audience who are just, at least at the beginning, not bought in, or maybe you have difficulty throughout getting buy-in? How do you deal with kind of that type of participant?
Yeah. So the blanket approach is like up front. We use an approach where we literally say, okay, hey, if you could define this training and you make it the most valuable use of your next 60 minutes or 60 hours, whatever the time frame is, right? What would that look like? And so we use the scaffolding approach to then draw those ideas out from them. And so that gives them a really good, that takes care of most of it. And then they start wondering like, okay, well, he just gave me he allowed me to have input, or she allowed me to have input on this. Okay, how are they going to get that done? Right. So that takes care of like the curiosity of that takes care of like 90%. And you might always have like one stickler, one stick in the mud, one person who just like, for whatever reason, because of where they are today, they do not want to be there. That person does exist. It can happen. So there's a number of different things we do. So we're just in reviewing even some of the stuff that we've done, right? So maybe that person, even if they don't want to journal on the topic, you cut them loose to do some writing in their book or take notes in their phone. You give them some opportunity to talk with somebody else. All of a sudden, when they start talking with somebody else, that sort of activates what's going on with them. So that increases the likelihood that they will buy in. Right. So those are like the little things that we do along the way. And then like, if it's like this person is not getting to it and they're being sort of stinky, and that's to a detriment of my whole classroom, I might just have a quick conversation with them over lunch or on a break. Excuse me, and just kind of see what else is going on for them. Is there a way that we can make this more enjoyable, and just try to find out, okay, what's going on? And I will be blunt and abrupt and just, in a nice way, and just say, hey, understand, I can definitely see that this is not going, well for you, or this does not look like fun. Okay, what's going on? I'll just kind of see, what I get back. I take that on a one-by-one basis. Literally for me, that almost, we run a lot of events, and I've probably had that, a dozen times, over the last 2 years, where there's just somebody who, you had to talk to outside of the room. And, sometimes it's not a fit, and whatever, as long as you've got everybody else pretty well engaged, that's what I will do. So, they're on their journey. Everybody else is on their own journey, and we got to respect where that person is at the same time too. We have very little of that, which I think just speaks to the stuff that we're talking about here today, which is, this is how you engage a classroom. This is how you increase engagement in your classroom. This is how you create something that is worth attending so that it's more fun, right? And that's really what this stuff is all meant to do.
Yeah, as a percentage of the people who show up on day one not wanting to be there, it's a very, very, very tiny fraction who are still not wanting to be there at the end of day two. It's almost so.
Yeah. And it almost always, that person has something else going on. Yeah. It's not even about you.
Yeah.
Right. So you can't take it personal. It's usually like, hey, whatever. You never know. A relationship could be breaking down at home. Had somebody get sent to our training one time that found out from us before they found out from the company that paid for them. That's not always a good scenario. If other people who, they think they know it better, and that's it. I literally had the training buyer from a major company in our industry who was, he literally was just being a wet blanket over everybody else in the classroom and was not participating. And that was the only time I've ever had to throw somebody out of my
Hmm.
training and literally just get rid of him. So, that's like the nuclear option for me.
Yeah.
Otherwise I will find other ways to get the room engaged.
Yep.
So, mhm.
Perfect. Perfect. So let's wrap this up. So if you are new to training and development, I had a first time presentation, maybe you've given presentations, they just haven't gone very well. Like, what is, maybe a couple of resources or just one or two things that you would say, hey,
Got it. Okay. So I mentioned 2 books early on. I would definitely order them on Amazon. I'm pretty sure they're still out there. Quantum Teaching and Strategies for Great Teaching are just 2 of the resources that I've gone to. And anytime I work with a new facilitator, I say, get these books and start learning these concepts. Those are the 2 like big things. I would say come to an MJST event and see how we do it. I think that would be a shameless self-plug that I don't feel any shame at all. I'll be honest, like I know in my heart of hearts that we are very good at what we do when it comes to facilitation, and the type of classroom that we create is unique compared to what most people get to experience. I'm not trying to be arrogant in saying that. I'm saying like we've committed to creating an experience that other people can't get elsewhere. And that means we will continue to innovate and find new ways and better ways and other ways that we can continue to lead, beyond that, create that gold standard for what training and coaching should look like. So, those are obviously two big ones. Like, come hang with us, come to a 2-day live event, get your boss to pay for it, and we'll we'll get you in here and show you how it's done. The other thing I guess that I would suggest is I spend a lot of time in the YouTube watching how other people do it. And so I study some of my heroes, Tony Robbins, Brendan Burchard. Now they're more on like the speaking end of the spectrum. You usually will find more of their keynotes or live events, but just watch how Tony uses his words and watch how he creates engagement with an audience of 15,000 people where everybody feels like he's talking to them. Right. So you can't watch some of those things and then not automatically, start to internalize some of the tactics that they use. So Tony, Brendan Burchard is somebody who I really enjoy. And there's another guy who very few people probably know of. He was one of the founders of Quest Nutrition, like Quest bars. Tom Bilyeu has got an amazing YouTube channel. I watch him to learn and seek how he asks questions. He's better than anybody I think out there right now in asking questions. He's very, very good. And he gets the most amazing people on his YouTube show, which is then syndicated in all sorts of other ways. So subscribe to his YouTube channel and just watch how he engages with his group or with his learner or his interviewee, if you will. And that's just one of the best ones out there right now.
Awesome. And I guess the last piece of like advice I would give is that this is all just practice, right? Like you've been doing this, 15 plus years. I have not been doing that. I'm still learning. And so like, if you've heard anything here today that sounds interesting to you, like pick 1 or 2 things and just try that out. So if it's just, asking what questions are there instead of do you have questions, or trying out scaffolding, like you don't have to do everything in every presentation. Like pilot things, see if they work for you. If they don't, try something different. Like this is all a journey and a practice of learning. But it starts, I think, with the desire to want to make your presentations more engaging. And if you're starting from there, then it's just practice and figuring out what works best for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. I mean, I always cringe a little bit when if somebody has to come up and follow somebody that's got a lot of experience. There's almost this feeling like I'm not good enough. I can't be as good as they were. They've got their pacing down. They've got their tone. Like they know how to tell stories. They know how to write with the fat end of the marker on the flip chart. By the way, another tip, write with the fat end of the marker on the flip chart and get Mr. Sketch markers. When you use like any hotel that you ever go to, like if you're going to your company's conference and you have to give a presentation and you're going to choose to use a flip chart, okay, guarantee you that hotel will try to give you dry erase markers to write on the flip chart with. It creates a terrible odor, and you are now the source of that odor, and the people in your classroom associate subconsciously that negative smell with you. Now you're the stinky facilitator. You want to be the good smelling facilitator. You got to hook yourself up with, I don't even think I have them in my backpack today, Mr. Sketch markers. Okay. You've been using them since you were in kindergarten. They smell like lemon and orange and blueberry and banana, whatever that, I don't know, all the different colors of the rainbow and the smells of the, I don't know, there's no smell thing, but all the smells in the spectrum of smelling, grape and blueberry and all that good stuff. So it creates a more desirable experience for your classroom as well as you, because while they're talking, you can be sniffing blueberry. So that would be one other key thing. So just watch out for that. But just don't, when you come back to Amanda's point, it's not about perfection. It's just progress. Nobody expects you to be, stand up and be the next Tony Robbins or Jim Rohn, or pick your famous facilitator, trainer person. That's not your job. Especially if you're inside of a company, your job is just to get up and try to create an experience where people can enjoy the experience and learn something from you at the same time.
Perfect. Lots of good stuff here.
This is a good one.
Yeah, for sure. Hopefully folks have been able to take some things away, and we'll throw some of these resources up in the show notes so that you can grab those. And we hope that you guys will tune in next time.
You got it. Hey guys, head over to markjewelltraining.com and check out our upcoming list of regional events. We have a Millennial Mastermind coming up in April. We have a Thriving Leader in the month of May. We can always add some stuff over time if we need to. We've got some more events coming up this fall. So hit us up with your interest on those things. We've also got some really good blog posts. There are 48 other episodes of the podcast that you can check out as well that are available there, as well as on iTunes, which you might be listening to this on right now. So with that, guys, we thank you for paying attention. Thanks for those of us that joined us on the Facebook Live today. And for all of you loyal listeners on the podcast, we very, very, very much appreciate you taking in this content. And we'll say this, everything else is surviving, my friends. It's your time to thrive today. Let's go get it.
Thanks for tuning in to the Survivor's Guide to Thriving podcast. You can find the show notes and links to all the resources mentioned in this episode by heading over to markjewelltraining.com/podcast. And if you feel so inclined, we'd love it if you could head over to iTunes and leave us a rating and review. That's what helps us move up in the charts so that more people can find us and start their surviving to thriving journey. See you next week.